All right, guys, here's your introduction to ecology. I'm a little rusty using this system, so you'll have to bear with me. I want you guys to watch this lesson video and then take a note as best you can. And then each slide you can pause it so you can keep up. It's not going to be like doing it live in class where I can say, is everybody caught up? Does anybody have any questions? You're just going to go through this and you're going to pause this video as you need to pause it. So that you can stay caught up. All right. This should go into your notebook as to use for a resource for your final assessment on ecology, which will be in a few days. All right. So here's your intro to ecology. So let's start with what makes up the Earth, the spheres of the Earth. So we've got the atmosphere, and what atmosphere is it's the layers of gases that surround the Earth. And you think of it as air, and we can talk about what air is made up of. It's mostly nitrogen. If I ask students, usually they say, well, air is just oxygen, or it's mostly oxygen, maybe some carbon dioxide. But it's actually 78% nitrogen gas, 21% oxygen gas. That's what makes up most of the atmosphere. And you'll notice that those two numbers do not add up to 100%. And that last remaining 1% or so is other gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and ozone and stuff like that. The lithosphere is the solid outer layer of the Earth. So that's what we're on right now, unless you're in a lake or an ocean somewhere right now, then you're on the lithosphere. It has about 50 to 150 kilometers in thickness. And then we have the hydrosphere, which is water. Hydro means water. All of us water in solid, liquid, and gas form. 97% of all water on Earth is contained in the ocean. That means it's salt water, undrinkable, and that only leaves 3% for our lakes and rivers and things like that. And then finally, the biosphere is the zone around the Earth where life can exist. So essentially in all of those areas, the atmosphere, the lithosphere, and the hydrosphere, you can have living things in any of those areas of the Earth. And they do, they touch and they overlap and stuff like that. All living things need space, water, and nutrients to survive. You can see that's cut off with the webcam, but that's okay. It's just survive. And this would be a good spot for you guys to pause it and make sure you're caught up. Those are three good definitions and information to start your ecology notes off. What is ecology? Ecology is the study. It's a branch of biology when it studies the relationships between living organisms and their environments. It's something that you may get into when you're older. You'll study it in much greater detail when you're in, let's say, grade 11 biology. And an ecosystem is any area where living organisms interact with each other and their non-living surroundings. As a part of this lesson on Introduction to Ecology, you're going to have lots of vocabulary. And the reason for that is like a lot of your assignments will be vocabulary based today. The reason for that is biologists love their big words. That's going to be your biggest challenge in this particular unit, is that there's big words that you don't use anywhere else, like lithosphere, hydrosphere, ecology, ecosystem, abiotic, biotic, stuff like that. Biologists love their big words, their big fancy vocabulary. So you're going to see lots of words today that you haven't seen before, or maybe you've seen once or twice in your life, but you definitely don't use them in day-to-day life. And that's why some of your assignments, or most of your assignments today, will be vocabulary based. And an ecosystem can be to the size of a drop of water to the whole lake. If you take a drop of water, let's say out of a pond, and you were to look at it under a microscope, then you'd see that it's filled with living things. It's got little green bits of algae. It's got little microorganisms that are eating each other. And a whole lake or an area of an ocean can also be considered an ecosystem. So it can be very small or can be very, very big. Again, just to go back a slide, if you're not caught up, you don't have to write as fast as I can read this to you. Pause this video and as much as you need to. so you can stay caught up and think about what you're writing, actively writing it down. So an ecosystem is made up of two components, the living and the non-living components. Now, the fancy biology word for living is biotic, and the fancy biology word for non-living is abiotic. And that's just what they mean. Why didn't they just say living and non-living? Don't ask me. I'm not a biologist. I'm a physicist. I'm just trying to get you through a quick unit on ecosystems. So the living parts of the ecosystems consist of producers and consumers, and we'll get into a little later what those words mean. You may have come across them in elementary school before. I know my kids have. Whereas the non-living or abiotic parts of an ecosystem are things like air, temperature, water, minerals, soil, humidity. Those are all abiotic parts of an ecosystem. Those are things that are non-living. Staying on ecosystem, an ecosystem can be grouped into two types of environments. That's aquatic and terrestrial. Two more words that you probably don't use. Aquatic means water, and terrestrial means on land. Some ecosystems can transition between the two types, which allows bordering ecosystems to interact and create more biodiversity, which is what is biodiversity? Again, pause it here. I went through this slide really quickly, way faster than anybody can write. So pause it back there and get caught up. Biodiversity positively influences ecosystems by making the environment less fragile. So fragile means it can collapse or be destroyed very easily. And biodiversity allows it to be more stable. For example, if one food source is eliminated, then there are lots of alternative food sources. The more biodiversity, the more different types of living things in an ecosystem, then the more things can go wrong and the ecosystem still survive. If one type of animal or plant goes extinct, completely wiped out, or completely removed from that ecosystem, then everything else can still survive because they have other food sources, other ways to survive. So this is why biodiversity is really good for the health of an ecosystem. Otherwise, if something's food source is eliminated, you have to relocate or perish. An example of a fragile ecosystem might be seen in like a farmer's field, because the farmer's goal is to make what's called a monoculture. Mono means one, and culture is just the type of thing that lives there. So in a wheat field, for example, or let's take a bean field, a farmer doesn't want other things living in his field. That farmer wants just beans in the field and nothing else. He doesn't want the things that eat the beans, doesn't want the things that eat the beans. He wants nothing else but beans in the bean field, because that's going to allow the beans to flourish, and he's going to get a good, a high yield off the crop. But if any part of that ecosystem dies out, then the entire ecosystem would collapse on itself, because if one food source is eliminated, then there are no other food sources to replace it. What does sustainability means? Well, it's basically the ability to maintain a natural ecological balance. And I just want to get that picture out of the way here. I just want to get out of that for a second. And I'm just going to pause my recording. Actually, I don't need to pause. I'm just going to move this guy out here. I just thought it was blocking some of my stuff. All right, back to it. Let's move that and get back to where we were. So it's the ability to maintain natural ecological conditions or processes without interruption, weakening, or loss of value. So sustainability is essentially how strong the ecosystem is. How much how many problems can if there's a big fire or something in a forest ecosystem, will that completely destroy the ecosystem, or will every species have to relocate because of that fire? Or is it strong enough, is it have got enough biodiversity to make a comeback? And our last slide here is on the levels of organization in an ecosystem. So we start with an individual. Well, what's an individual? I'm an individual, you're an individual. Every living thing could be considered to be an individual. So I'm going to go with, let's say, a squirrel in the forest. I definitely should have looked up how to spell squirrel before I put that in. You guys don't need to spell check me. That'd be just great. So an individual would be a squirrel. A population is the members of the same species living in the same area. So that would be like all of the squirrels in an area or in an ecosystem, you could say. A community is the collection of populations in an ecosystem. So again, we're talking about a forest ecosystem here, or a forested area. So the collection of populations in an ecosystem would be all the plants and animals. Not in the world, not in a particular biome or anything like that, but just in an area, in a forested area. An ecosystem takes the community, which are all the plants and animals in an area, combines it with the abiotic surroundings, and that's what makes an ecosystem. And hopefully, if you guys are writing down these annotations, then you can pause it and get all the plants and animals in the area, but I'm going to erase this right now so that you guys can see it. So an ecosystem just takes the biotic things in an ecosystem and combines them with the abiotic. So there's your biotic and your abiotic. Biotic are the living things, and abiotic are the things like the soil and the temperature and the minerals available. And the amount of sunlight would be like an abiotic factor as well. So that's what makes up an ecosystem. So that's the study of ecology. Now, a biome is a collection of ecosystems that are similar, usually in plants and vegetation growth, like a grassland ecosystem, tundra, and forest. The grasslands are like in the there's big grassland areas found in the prairies. So we're talking about Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan. The tundra would be found up north where there's very little vegetation. Conditions are tough. It's rocky, it's cold, etc. And then the forest ecosystems are usually have a lot of biodiversity. So like there's the deciduous forest biome, which is more southern. Technically, we are in a deciduous forest area, even though we've chopped down most of the trees for farmland. But if you look at a place like the Pinery, you could say that that's a deciduous forest ecosystem. Whereas up as you go more north, you notice more pine trees, needly trees, and that's called a coniferous forest biome. And that actually takes up most of Canada. And if you combine all the biomes on Earth, and I know you can't see that because it's hidden behind the picture, but it says biosphere. Biosphere. I'm going to write it right here at the top. Biosphere. And the biosphere is the Earth. It's a sphere, and it's a collection of all those biomes. So that's like the word hierarchy means like the level of organization. So the smallest thing is the individual, and a bunch of those individuals together makes up a population. A bunch of different populations in an area is called a community. A bunch of communities living together with some abiotic factors as well is called an ecosystem. The biome is a collection of ecosystems in the same area and usually similar in vegetation, like grassland, tundra, forest. Jungle is an ecosystem. Ocean, shallow seas, lake ecosystems, or that's not a biome, but there's different types of ocean biomes. Deep ocean, that's a different biome altogether as well. And all of them together makes up the biosphere. And the biosphere is simply the Earth. So that's a quick intro to ecology. There'll be some assignments that follow this. If you weren't able to get everything down, just go back and pause the video on each slide so that you can get this stuff into your notes, and you'll find that those are useful to you down the road. I don't think I need to say anything else. I am going to go into Google Classroom here and just show you what else you guys have to do. So just hold on a second as I wait for the internet to catch up here. So hopefully you didn't find anything too overwhelming in that lesson. It's lots of vocabulary, and you'll find that with every lesson that we do in ecosystems and any biology topic, really. In grade 10, you'll be looking at biological systems and cells and reproduction and stuff like that. Lots and lots of terminology that you have to deal with there. So I'm just going to go into your classwork here, sustainable ecosystems, go down to the first block in January 11th. Depending on which group of students is watching this, this may or may not pertain to you. But if I go through this, so your intro to ecology note is finished. There's a worksheet on ecosystems and ecology introduction. You can answer the vocabulary questions on paper or print it out. And by ecology terms, I'm talking about this intro sheet right here. So if I open this up, and this is what you're going to see when you open it up too, it does say to use page 8 to 17 in your textbook, but there is a word bank. And I think with the lesson we just did, you might be able to get away without it. Now, if you can't, I have attached the pages of the textbook here. And I labeled them, like, for example, page 10. It should come up like that. If you're working on a computer or a Chromebook, it will be easier for you to read. But if you're using your phone, it's going to be a little awkward, but that's the way that goes. You'll have to zoom in and read it as best you can. Item number 3 is watch the Bill Nye Ecosystems video. It's 23 minutes. I know it's geared towards a bit of a younger audience, probably grade 6, 7 than 8, 9, 10. But there's definitely good information in it. He's a pretty entertaining guy. So watch that, and he'll go over some of the same stuff that I did in probably a more entertaining fashion, I would say. And then finally, I just want you to fill out the ecology unit terms sheet. Now, this one you can do in a number of ways. If you want to open it up as a Google Doc and type in these definitions, that would be just fine with me. If you would prefer to print out the sheet and write in the definitions because you want to make it a part of your notes in your notebook, that would be, as far as being useful to you, that would probably be the best way to do it. Or you could just write out the definitions on a piece of paper. If you don't have access to a printer and you don't want to type these definitions into here, then you could just write out the definitions on a piece of paper, put it into your notebook, and be done with it. And that gets you through your first items for the day. I would encourage you to take a break from 9:40 to 9:55 roughly. That being said, I'm going to be offline for a period of time anyway, up until about 9:55, just for something like 20 or 30 minutes. I'll give you more details. Hopefully I've given you more details at the beginning of the day. But make sure you're back on Google Meet at 9:55 for your second attendance. That's when we're going to start block 2, which I'll be doing an introductory Google Meet with you, followed by another lesson video, and followed by some assignments and videos that you can watch. So hopefully that's not too bad for your first run. You guys can email me if you have any problems. I'm going to keep the Google Meet active as well as we go throughout the day so that if you need to jump on and actually talk to me about anything, any questions you might have about this content, then go ahead and jump on, and hopefully I'm there staring at the screen when you get on there. All right, guys, that's all for now. Thank you.